the higher you go up into an organization, whether it be a professional organization or a volunteer organization, what you start to recognize is that you're faced with these ethical decisions and they become increasingly more complex. And they are less so black and white issues. The younger you are, they seem very black and white. And then the older you get, you realize, ooh, I'm dealing with a lot of gray right now. They are much more complex. And the ethical decisions, they go beyond what you see and what you feel, and they go beyond, a lot of times, some of the policies that we have and the procedures that we have and some of the guiding principles that we have. And they really start involving other people's perspectives, other people's realities, other stakeholders, and they definitely involve some political complexities that we may or may not feel comfortable with. Sometimes they are really, really messy situations that we need to navigate through. So it's hard to be in these situations. We don't receive a lot of training. Plus, if you look at some of the research that's out there, the models that are out there, even the philosophers, I'll share 2 examples. The philosophers that are out there, sometimes they will say things and you're like, dang it, that sounds really good. I'm going to use that philosophy. You'll see how they even conflict with one another, and sometimes you can't even go forward with both of their statements that they make. Okay, we're not talking about right versus wrong decisions. Okay, these are situations like embezzlement would be one. Okay, these are pretty easy. Okay, there is a law or there is a policy that says thou shalt not steal from the organization. Okay, so those are really easy because you can go to mission statements, you can go to value statements, you can go to policy, you can go to law, and then you have the decision. Those are fairly easy. Now, actually implementing that decision, I don't want to minimize that. That is going to be really messy. That is going to be really difficult. Having that difficult conversation, Jameson, I have to talk to you. I know you would never do this, but I have to talk to you about that. That would be a really difficult discussion that I would have to have with an employee, or firing someone, letting someone go, putting them on probation. Very difficult to have those conversations, but the actual decision is fairly clear-cut. So we're not talking about right versus wrong. What we're talking about, I think you saw this on the flyer, is we're talking about right versus wrong decisions, where there are 2 rights. So you're sitting there with a situation, and there are 2 rights to the answer, but both of them cannot go forward. You're going to be dealing with competing values. Sometimes those values could be core values for yourself. Sometimes they could be core values for your organization. But both of those values, there's no way for both of them to go forward, and one has to be sacrificed, and that doesn't feel good. These are situations that are troubling, they are complicated, and they are most certainly serious. It's right to have access for higher education. Well, access for my first-generation students means that it has to be really low tuition. So that it's right to have access, for everyone to have access to higher education. Well, our current funding structure basically says that a lot of that comes from the taxes, okay? But it's also right to minimize the taxes of the individual citizens. There's 2 rights that are included. It's also right, if you like our national parks, it's right to have access to national parks and our state parks. But it's also right to protect the environment. So sometimes that means you don't get access to those. So you see how there's 2 rights going forward? Okay. This type of decision-making, ethical decision-making, really involves asking more questions than it does giving answers, and trying to gain as much insight from different stakeholders as you possibly can. And then I want to share with you 2 philosophers that I was talking to you about earlier. These are great. Okay, so if you look at John Stuart Mill, he is a 19th century British philosopher, social reformer, and basically what he said is if you are faced with an ethical decision, okay, what you need to do is you need to consider this. Happiness to the greatest amount of people. Do the most good for the most amount of people if you have to make a decision. That sounds good, right? Just make sure more people benefit than don't benefit. And then there's Immanuel Kant. He's an 18th century German philosopher, and he said that one must do their moral duty, meaning that you need to know what your morals are, you need to know what your values are, and then you need to act on those. Okay? It's basically having integrity. Know what your values are, and act on them. Decisions. The nice thing about ethical decisions when they're really, really tough is they serve as these beautiful moments for us where we discover more about who we are. They really help to define who we are, who we've been, and who we want to be going in the future. And they involve 3 different characteristics. But before I go into that, the actions that we take during those ethical decisions, like what we decide to do and what we decide to not do, will send powerful, powerful messages to the people that surround us. So the 3 characteristics, they reveal, they test, and they shape. So when we're faced with these situations, one of the things that we find out is that they reveal really who we are to our core. Because it's that whole idea of a single gesture could tell you a lot about who a person is. It can tell you a lot about who they've been, who they are right now, and who they are going forward. So if you see me walking across campus and I see some garbage and I pick it up, did you just make a judgment about me? For me to pick up trash, it really is a reflection that I care about the environment that I work in, and I have great pride in the university that I'm willing to pick up someone else's trash because I care enough to do that, and it will say who I am going forward. Then testing is the idea that there are times in our lives when we're going to be faced with a situation, I'm sure all of us can probably think of one, where our values are going to collide with one another. And these could be really, really core values that we have for ourselves. So I'll give you an example. I worked at another university prior to coming to CSU Channel Islands, and I worked there for 14 years. For 13 of those years, it was a great institution. I worked with highly intelligent faculty, I worked with creative staff, I worked with dedicated alumni, and I loved the students that I worked with because they really wanted to make a difference on the campus, and I felt like I was really making a difference on that campus. And then the last year that I was there, I had a new associate vice president come in, and I quickly found that I was working in an environment with a man whose values conflicted with my own values. I had a lot of anxiety, lots of nightmares about water and drowning. And then what started happening is I started seeing things physically deteriorating. And I remember sitting in front of my computer screen one day, and there was something on it, and I knew it was email, but I physically couldn't read the screen anymore. And so it came to the point where these values were colliding, and I knew I couldn't go forward with both. I either needed to work and sacrifice my health, or I needed to choose my health and quit my job. So that's when 2 values are quitting. And then they shape. Defining moments shape who we are. So you can think about it like, a river, meandering through the countryside, and you see the stones at the bottom of the riverbed, and they're nice and smooth because the river is constantly going over it and it's shaping the stone. And then there are times when the dam will break and the water will gush through and the banks will fall and the direction of the river will completely change. And that's what happens with these defining moments. Do you continue on making the same decisions, taking the same actions, and they truly do define who you are going forward because of your consistency, and then sometimes you're going to be faced with these dramatic decisions that you have to make that have a dramatic impact on who you are going forward.